Hello, hello, and welcome back to Nobody Told Me This, the channel where we lift the veil on corporate knowledge and make it available to everyone. So today, there's a situation that I'm going to wager that most, if not all, corporate employees have experienced at some point in time. Something goes wrong at work. It creates a problem. People get frustrated. They scramble to fix it as quickly as possible, and then things go back to normal. Everyone moves on like this problem isn't going to rear its ugly head again in the not too distant future. Then 3 months later, the same exact thing happens and people act shocked. Didn't we just fix this problem a few months ago? Sorry, no, you patched the problem. And so here we are again, and we'll be here again in another 3 months if you don't fix it instead of patching it this time. Because so many of us get caught in an endless cycle of patchwork fixes, today I'm going to talk about one of the most costly habits in business today, and that is opting for a quick fix instead of solving the actual problem. None of what I say in this video is intended to make anyone feel bad about being caught in this cycle, because there are actual psychological reasons why we do this. Once you become aware of and understand those reasons, it's actually a lot easier to start changing the way you react to problems. So hopefully this video will get you started on the road to change. So first, let's ask and answer the question, why do we default to short-term fixes? And when something goes wrong, we are almost always under pressure to fix it, and fix it fast. We have deadlines and customers waiting on us for a solution. The last thing anyone wants to do in that moment is be the one to say, let's slow down and figure out what's actually causing this. People hear slow down and they panic. So what happens is we patch the problem instead of solving it, because patching is faster, in the short term anyway, than solving. And usually the patch works, again, in the short term, and the immediate problem goes away. Because the immediate problem went away, we tend to see the patch as a win, and so we move on. And this is where the psychology piece comes in, and I'll keep it pretty high level because while I studied this in grad school in relation to decision making and change initiatives, I'm not a psychologist. So, some of the stuff I can't even get it too in depth into it because it's all about the brain. But there is a concept in behavioral economics called present bias. And it essentially means that we are wired to overvalue what happens right now and undervalue what happens later, even if we know that the later outcome is more important than the immediate outcome. The relief of solving the immediate issue feels more real and more valuable to our brains than the abstract benefit of preventing the same problem again in the future. Further, research has shown that the regions of the brain involved in processing immediate rewards and the regions involved in long-term reasoning are basically competing with one another during the decision-making process. The immediate reward pathway is like fast, emotionally driven, and really hard to ignore. And the long-term reasoning pathway requires more cognitive effort and it feels less urgent. So in times of pressure and stress, the immediate pathway almost always wins the battle. So when you're in the middle of a problem and you opt for the quickest available solution, you're not doing anything wrong. You're doing what your brain was designed to do. The issue with that is what our brains were designed to do and what it takes to make good long-term decisions are not the same thing. Some research was done at MIT on this topic, and it resulted in the identification of 5 psychological pressures, I guess, to make it, to push us towards short-term thinking. The acronym SHORT was created to make it easier to remember them. And the 5 pressures are salience, habits, overload, responsibility, and targets. Short. Salience is especially relevant in this situation because, as I mentioned just a minute ago, immediately visible problems dominate our thinking far more than the future problems do, even when the future problem is technically more important. If it's happening right now and it's causing pain right now, it feels more real than a potential recurring problem that you haven't experienced just yet. So when you factor in our literal biology and then add to that the organizational pressures we have, like quarterly goals, the fact that performance reviews are usually tied to more immediate results, and the fact that leaders often get rewarded for quick wins, you end up with a system that's pretty much designed to reward short term thinking, even though that's not the best option. So, all that helps to explain why we tend to opt for the patch. But next, we're going to get into what the patch actually costs us. So, second, let's ask, what is the real cost of the quote unquote band-aid mentality? And I'll start with a pretty alarming statistic because it amplifies just how common patching is, despite the fact that people know it's costly. 85% of executives believe their organizations are bad at diagnosing problems. 87% of those executives believe their organizations incur significant costs as a result of their poor problem diagnosis skills. So, what this tells us is that the vast majority of senior leaders already know that their organizations are not solving the right problems. They know it's costing them big time, and yet the cycle continues. What does it actually cost, though? Because not all costs are financial. I'll start with the financial cost and get that out of the way. But research consistently shows that reactive problem management, meaning you respond after something goes wrong rather than addressing the underlying cause, costs organizations 3 to 4 times more than proactive approaches. This cost calculation factors in downtime, emergency labor wages like overtime, and lost productivity. So every time the same problem comes back, you are paying to fix it again and again and again. And when you look at it over the long term, that cost compounds. If you invest in a single proactive upfront solution, that cost is usually one and done. What I mean is you'll literally end up paying more to patch the problem repeatedly versus just taking the time to solve the root cause of the issue from the jump. And next, there's the opportunity cost. And every hour your team spends putting out a fire that they've already addressed before is an hour that they're not spending on something that actually moves the business forward. Organizations that get stuck in reactive firefighting mode are fundamentally limited in how strategic or innovative they can be because their people are tied up managing problems that, with a different approach, wouldn't need to be managed at all because they wouldn't exist. And then lastly, there's the human cost. And this is a case of leaving the most important for last because in organizations, people are its most valuable asset. And there are few things more demoralizing than being asked to fix the same thing over and over again. Research indicates that when people feel like they're stuck on a hamster wheel, burnout increases, engagement plummets, and people start looking for a new place of employment where they hopefully won't be spending a decent chunk of their time being a firefighter. There is a significant cultural cost to chronic firefighting. And then there's Peter Senge, one of the most influential thinkers in organizational learning, who states in his book, The Fifth Discipline, today's problems come from yesterday's solutions. And what he's saying is that quick fixes don't just fail to solve your current problems, they often end up creating new ones. If you solve the symptom, but the underlying cause is still there, it doesn't just go away. And sometimes the patch itself brings about new complications. The easy way out usually leads back in. And you cannot ignore a problem and make it go away, no matter how much you might want to. Also, I highly recommend reading The Fifth Discipline. I have it here. It was an immensely valuable piece of my master's program, and I used up multiple highlighters while reading it. So, highly recommend it to anybody in a leadership role. So, all of that then leads into our third question, which is, what does solving the actual problem look like? So, we've established why we do what we do with quick fixes and what it costs to go with a quick fix. So now I'll get into what the alternative, aka solving the actual problem, looks like. I think people assume that solving the actual problem is more difficult than it really is. That's part of the reason why it doesn't happen more often. People tend to assume that solving a root problem requires some like expensive months-long initiative, but it doesn't have to. And truthfully, it doesn't often look like that at all. The methodology that most directly addresses this is called root cause analysis, or RCA, and it's been used across a variety of industries for decades, and so it's not a new concept. Root cause analysis is really straightforward. It means that instead of addressing what you can see on the surface, you investigate what's actually driving the problem underneath. And there's an analogy that's pretty prevalent in root cause analysis writing that does a good job of providing a visual. So I'll share it with you guys. So think about a weed in your garden. You can cut the visible weed growth above the ground and it'll look fine for a while. But if you didn't pull the root, the weed will continue to come back no matter how many times you cut the visible growth. Root cause analysis is about pulling the root. That's why it's called root cause analysis, like, duh. One of the most applicable tools within root cause analysis is called the 5 whys. Peter Senge talks about the 5 whys in the Fifth Discipline, and this was used by Toyota for ages. They might still use it. I'm not entirely sure. But to use the 5 whys, you'll see that it's named pretty appropriately. When a problem occurs, you ask why 5 times. Each answer forms the basis of the next why question. And what you'll typically find is that by the 4th or 5th why, you've uncovered the actual root cause of the issue. So here's a simple example based around the issue that a client keeps receiving incorrect invoices. So why number 1? Why are they receiving incorrect invoices? Because the billing team is entering the wrong information. Why number 2? Why is the billing team entering the wrong information? Because the customer billing intake form is confusing and the form gets interpreted differently by different people, so clients fill out the forms inconsistently. Why number 3? Why is the form so confusing to people? Because the form was designed years ago and hasn't been updated, even though the data entry process changed a while back. Why number 4? Why hasn't the form been updated? Because there isn't a standard process for reviewing and updated forms when a process changes. And here we start to see the underlying problem. So why number 5? Why isn't there a standard process for ensuring that the forms are updated? Because nobody owns the responsibility to ensure that the forms are in compliance with the current process. And boom, underlying problem unlocked. So the real problem here isn't that the client's invoices are incorrect. It's the lack of a process ownership and lack of documentation standards. If you fix that, the invoice problem goes away. And probably along with a few other issues that you didn't even realize were related to the same root cause. And this is also where systems thinking comes in as a broader framework. Systems thinking, as described in the Fifth Discipline, is the practice of seeing wholes rather than parts. It's the understanding of how different elements of a system interact with each other, as opposed to looking at each problem in isolation. And I could go into causal loop diagrams here, but that would add significant time to this video. So maybe I'll cover causal loop diagrams another time. But they're actually really helpful once you understand them and are really key to getting systems thinking. Anyway, the point is, leaders who practice systems thinking are much better equipped to not just see what went wrong, but why it went wrong within the larger context of how the organization actually operates. And the why is important because a lot of times what looks like a people problem on the surface, aka the billing team entering incorrect information, is actually a process problem. The lack of existence of responsibility or standardized methods to ensure that the documentation is in compliance with the current processes. So systems thinking helps you see all the ways in which an issue affects an organization. So let's ask, how do I actually apply this information? What does all this look like in practice? And whether you're an individual contributor, a leader, manager, or a business owner, regardless of your role in an organization, there are a few things you can do to start shifting your behavior from reactive to proactive problem solving. First, before you implement a fix, ask whether you're solving the symptom or the problem. It sounds simple, but it's actually the most important habit to build in this process because it serves as the basis for everything that comes after this. When something goes wrong, your first question shouldn't be, how do we fix this right now? It should be, have we seen this before? And if the answer is yes, then that's a sign that the fix you applied last time didn't actually solve anything. So before you go and apply the same damn fix again, you owe it to yourself and to your organization to figure out why. Second, use the 5 whys before you even try to come up with a potential solution. The 5 whys takes maybe 10 minutes, so there's no excuse not to do it. You can do it on your own, but it's more effective if you involve the people closest to the problem because they often already know what the root cause is. They just haven't been asked. I've mentioned in previous videos that I've done that you should get curious about what's going on around you. And the 5 whys gives you a structured way to do that. This method will uncover root causes far more consistently than jumping straight into a solution crafted solely around a visible symptom of an invisible problem. Third, document your findings and what you did about them. One of the most frustrating patterns in reactive organizations is that the same problem gets solved by different people at different times with no shared learning. Someone fixes a problem in Q1 and then that person leaves the organization, or maybe they just don't share any information about the issue. And then when this problem shows up in Q3 in a different department, someone else will fix it without knowing it's been fixed before. Documentation doesn't have to be seen as a negative thing. Documentation can serve as institutional memory. And without this memory, you'll essentially start from zero every single time you go to fix a problem that's been fixed before. And fourth, leave time for proactive problem solving. And this is a leadership issue as much as anything else in this video so far. If every meeting or every initiative is driven by whatever's currently on fire, there's no space for the kind of thinking that prevents the fires in the first place. The leaders and business owners who operate most effectively are the ones who deliberately leave the time to look ahead. They consider what could go wrong and what patterns they might be seeing. These leaders and organizations are the ones that have learned and taken to heart that an upfront investment in problem solving costs a fraction of what it costs to solve a problem after a blow up. So in conclusion, finally, right, the tendency to reach for a short-term fix is fundamentally a reflection of how we're wired and the systems that we operate in. Quarterly targets reward short-term results. Performance reviews evaluate what happened in like the last 6 or 12 months. Promotions often go to people who visibly put out fires instead of the people who prevent them from behind the scenes. If you're a leader, you have the ability to change some of that. You can reward people for identifying root causes, not just for fixing a symptom. You can create a culture where it's normal and expected to ask why before you ask how. You, as a leader, can make it safe for people to slow down and investigate instead of scrambling to patch something before anybody notices. And if you're an individual contributor or a small business owner or anyone else who works largely on your own, you can start right now with the next problem you come across. Before you jump into fix-it mode, ask yourself, have I seen this before? And if so, what's really going on here? The time you spend solving a problem properly the first time is almost always less than the time you'll spend solving it the second, third, or fourth time. Short-term thinking rarely works in your favor. It just feels like it does in the moment. And now you know why. If the information in this video resonated with you, if you learned something, or if you found this valuable, subscribe. You don't want to miss what comes next. And drop a comment below. I genuinely want to know, like, is there a specific recurring problem in your work or business that you've been patching instead of fixing? We all have them, so let's talk about them. And I'll see you in the next one, where I will cover why team building is often overlooked in difficult times and why it's precisely in those times where teams matter the most. So thanks so much, and I'll see you soon. Bye.